Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, hope you got it, jnf.org. All right, as for this episode, our featured guest is Matthew Nouriel. Known as the drag queen named Empress Mizrahi, Matthew has many facets, including being Iranian, Jewish, and queer. Matthew advocates on behalf of Israel and the gay community and is the Community Engagement Director for JIMENA, an organization devoted to educating and advocating on behalf of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We'll have a link to all things Matthew on the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. But for now, we warmly welcome Matthew to the program, who joins us via Zoom from West Hollywood. I think that's in California, Matthew, isn't it?
It sure is. Hi.
Hi, great to have you aboard. And we have so many bases to cover. As I mentioned, you have so many facets about you. Indeed, we could have a whole conversation about each one of those facets. And we will, however, dip into each one and chat just real briefly about everything, including the Empress Mizrahi at the end of our conversation. But first, I really want to start, Matthew, by asking you about JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. What's the backstory behind it, and what was the need identified at the time in establishing the organization? Because you've been around for over 20 years, haven't you?
Yeah, the organization has been around for a little over 20 years, and they started, from what I understand, our organization started right after 9/11 happened, recognizing that there was this sort of Middle Eastern, a lot of Middle Eastern culture was kind of put to the forefront, a lot of it for the wrong reasons, when 9/11 happened, and the founders realized that there was a complete erasure of Jews from the Swana region. So that's around the time that it began, and the real reason behind JIMENA and the real need for JIMENA is due to the fact that not just outside of the Jewish world, but within the Jewish world, there isn't enough knowledge and recognition of the history and heritage of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. So we set out to change that.
I went on the JIMENA website ahead of our conversation, and I really want everybody within earshot to also check it out, JIMENA.org, correct?
Correct.
You have such a robust website in terms of the history of Jews from, again, the Middle East and North Africa. You have personal stories of people. It is a phenomenal, phenomenal resource. And before we started rolling, I did share with you the fact that I've been to every country from Algeria all the way to Iran, and even some countries I didn't mention to you, which are Muslim countries where Jews were. In fact, Sudan, for example, where I visited, Khartoum had a Jewish community. And you have all these stories and the history, as I said, packaged into that JIMENA website. And so it's just a phenomenal, phenomenal resource. So congrats to, indeed, you and the team. What do you think is the biggest misconception, Matthew, about the Jewish community from the Middle East and North Africa?
I think there's several that I'd like to highlight. Firstly, that we are a monolith, that Jewish culture from the Swana region, meaning Middle East and North Africa, all share a singular culture. And it's understandable because a lot of Ashkenazic culture, which spans across many, areas within Europe, are very similar. But when it comes to Middle Eastern and North Africa, there are very distinctive cultures. Like my family's from Iran, and our Jewishness is expressed rather differently than certainly from Arab countries surrounding us. So there's that. And then also, it sounds, when I say it, I feel stupid saying it, but people don't know that Jews are from these countries. And it's always surprising. To this day, I've been around a while, like it still surprises me when I tell people I'm Iranian and they're like, how are you Jewish and Iranian? Like, yeah, like it's so normal for me, but and I forget, like, especially living in Los Angeles, where there's such a large Jewish Iranian population. When you go outside of LA, you see that people genuinely don't realize that there are Jews from Iran, and yeah,
And they don't know the fact that there are still Jews in Iran.
exactly,
And
exactly.
there's a robust Jewish community still there. So I was there in 2007, and I was told that there were between 18 and 25,000 Jews. And then I just read a stat that said 10,000 to 15,000. Suffice to say, there is still a sizable Jewish community in Iran. Going back to the misconceptions that, well, sizable,
That's objective. I mean,
yeah,
there was
exactly.
about 80 to 100,000 pre-1979, and now
Well,
there's about 10,000.
absolutely. I mean, it's all relative. If you're talking about the number of Jews compared to the number that are in Lincoln, Nebraska, it's a lot. Okay, so let's put it into
Or
context.
compared to actually most other Middle Eastern countries where
Yes.
there literally are none left. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, when we talk about food, for example, the foods are different. The languages spoken are different. The melodies, oftentimes, that are used in liturgy are also very different. So I know people like to have this monolithic, and I always find it humorous, especially at Passover, when people say, "Oh, I'm making a Sephardic charoset." And I always think, what's a Sephardic charoset? You know, is your charoset from Egypt, or is it from Algeria, or is it a Tunisian, or is it for example, Lebanese? I mean, how is it different? Or Greek, for example? We had Jennifer Abadi here on the program, who I adore, and she wrote the book. Well, she's written several books, but one of which is Too Good to Pass Over. She's a cook, very well-known, established cook, and she features up Passover recipes from the Middle East, from North Africa, the Mediterranean region, which are indeed too good to pass over. You shouldn't just have them during Passover, but also during the rest of the year. And that's a wonderful resource. And I'd be happy to introduce the JIMENA community to Jennifer, if you don't know her already and are familiar with her.
I believe we do. I'm very proud to work for JIMENA, and our executive director, Sarah Levin, literally knows everybody. So I'm pretty sure we do. But thank you. I personally love an introduction.
Oh, she's fantastic. And I also had her on my regular The One Way Ticket Show podcast twice. So she's really a rock star when it comes to that. But I always think of that, and I think of the foods just as an example of truly how different the experiences, though, in many ways, and I want you to talk to this, are similar in the sense that during World War II, many of them had similar experiences. And then after the establishment of the State of Israel, many also had similar experiences.
Yes.
Right,
With the
in
exception
terms
of
of,
Iran.
with the exception of
With the
Iran. Go
exception of
ahead.
Iran.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Iran, it's interesting because, Mizrahi Heritage Month and the day to mark the expulsion and departure of Jews from Arab lands and Iran kind of lumps everybody in together, which is great. I mean, we need those commemorative events and times to get our history out there. But what's not often known is that, first of all, it's not widely known that, for example, the Farhud, which happened in Iraq, was essentially not Nazi sponsored. And what's also not widely known is while a lot of Arab countries were expelling their Jewish populations or making life so difficult that they had no choice but to leave, Jews in Iran were actually prospering for the first time in centuries. And that's because of the 1906 revolution, when Jews were emancipated and made equal citizens. But they didn't start to prosper until the second Pahlavi Shah came into power, which was in 1941. And from 1941 to 79, you saw Jews do really well for themselves. And Iran had very positive relations with Israel. There was trade deals, arms deals, flights direct from Tehran to Tel Aviv on a daily basis. And people don't realize that. So I just find that such a fascinating history.
Indeed. Any success stories that you'd care to share about JIMENA?
Well, firstly, I think what I would consider a success story is that JIMENA has very much been involved with the California curriculum situation. I'm sure you're aware how they wanted to exclude Jewish studies from their ethnic studies program, and JIMENA has been fighting alongside with individuals and organizations at the forefront of trying to have that changed. And indeed, there has been some progress made with that. I would also say what we've been very successful in is because so many Jewish people from Middle Eastern countries are now gone, and North African countries are now gone. We've been on this sort of mission, I think, since the inception of the organization, to preserve the histories and stories firsthand from people who lived them. Example being people who lived through the Farhud, people who lived through the Nazi sort of takeover of certain North African countries, people who witnessed those things firsthand before they're no longer with us and before our cultures are completely sort of watered down. Because again, there are no Jews left in Libya. There are no Jews left in Iraq, maybe one or two, right? I don't know.
There are a couple. There are a couple, yeah.
Literally a couple.
Yeah.
So we've been very successful in preserving these stories. We have them on video, we have them on file, we have archives, we have photographs, and that's something that we're very proud of.
Yeah, again, I really want everyone to check it out because it's such a wonderful resource. Again, JIMENA.org. So congratulations again to you and the team. Let's talk about Iran just for a moment right now, because I've gone on your Instagram feed and we'll have a link to that on the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast, as I've mentioned at the top of the show. You have been very vocal about what's been going on in Iran, and you being Iranian, of Iranian background, I just want you to share your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an issue that's very near and dear to me, and it's interesting. I've had this discussion with several friends of mine now, that I wasn't born in Iran. I was born outside of Iran.
You're born in London.
I was born in London, correct.
In case you needed to be reminded.
Yeah, thank you. My accent tells a different story at this point in my life. Yes, I'll go back and get that accent back. Anytime I go back, it comes back. But why it's important to me, I've had this discussion with several friends, and Iranian culture is so strong within all of us, even those of us who are first and second generation outside of Iran, especially Jewish Iranians, which I think is it's really, I don't want to say it's rare, because I know with other Middle Eastern cultures, like I have Moroccan friends, I have Algerian friends, and all of them have maintained the culture from their respective countries as well. But it's very strong within Iranian and within Iranian Jews. I mean, we connect very much to the culture of being Persian. So it means a lot to many of us. Now, I've been very outspoken because, and I just wrote an op-ed that was just released today in the foreword, talking about why aren't Jews more involved in this movement that's happening within Iran? Why is it not being talked about in synagogues? Why are Jewish communities not more involved with this? Because I feel like they should be. And I'm going to extend that on to actually a lot of Iranian Jews are not talking about this. And I think a big part of that comes from the reason why even Jews in Iran today have put out a letter standing with the government, right? It's an act of self-preservation. Let's not get it twisted. Why Iranian Jews have been so conditioned to keep our heads down. When I told my dad, when all of this broke out, what was happening, and I was going to a protest and I was going to start protesting, and he said his exact words were, "Don't get involved. Do not get involved." And I wanted to understand where this, it's a result of trauma, of a collective trauma, and where it comes from. And I wanted to kind of reverse that by being Jewish and Iranian and being very vocal about it. And now I have the luxury of doing that because I've never really been there. I think I went once when I was like a year old, so it doesn't really count. But I think it's also important for that generation, you know, my father, my grandparents' generation, who have been so conditioned to keep their head down, and the Jews who are within Iran who are also conditioned to keep their heads down and not get involved, for me to speak up on behalf of them. You know, the people who have been traumatized from the past won't speak up. A lot of them are afraid to. It's just what they've been conditioned to do for literally hundreds of years, even during what I refer to as the golden era of Jews in Iran, right? The Pahlavi dynasty, when Jews really prospered, there was still very much so, from my understanding, an element of, okay, we're now assimilated, we're equal, let's not, rock the boat by being too Jewish, right?
I think that sentiment, though, is a common sentiment in many places and in many countries. In other words,
Absolutely.
let's not rock the boat. You just hit it right there. And I can't blame them.
I don't blame them
Yeah.
either. I
Yeah. And I
really
know you're
don't.
not.
But for
But I
me,
think what you're saying is that because you can speak out, because you are not living there, you will speak out, right? In other
absolutely.
words, you're speaking on behalf of those that can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I hate to, I guess I feel a little pompous saying on behalf of, but
Well, it is
I,
on behalf of,
I'm
really. I mean, at the
speaking
end
up
of the
for
day,
those who feel like they can't. That's
you
what
still have relatives there.
my relatives, any relatives that were left, have since passed away. I think I had one or two. The rest of them all came here. And I think that's important to also note that many of the Iranian Jews who are still there are older, from my understanding.
Yeah, when I was there, as I said, I was there in 2007, and there were quite a number of younger people there. Now, I don't
Mm.
know what's happened. Yeah, I don't know what's happened in the ensuing years if they left or not.
Many
But
have left.
yeah, and
Many have
also
left since then.
also don't forget is that you have a number of Iranians that live in another country that also have a house in Iran. I'm talking about Iranian Jews, and they do go back and forth.
Some, not
Yeah,
many, from
but
what I know.
there are
There
some
are
because
some.
I have met them
Yeah.
throughout the years. So they have that. You know, what's interesting though is that people that criticize Israel, in my mind, don't connect the dots between what's happening in Iran and Iran's support for all these terrorist groups that are fighting against Israel.
It's so interesting that you bring this up because I feel like you're giving me a chance to speak about something that I don't like to speak about very often for the mere reason that I don't want to ever draw attention away from what is happening in Iran and what it's about, because it's not about Israel, it's about Iran. So I want to preface by saying that it's about the people of Iran. However, I do feel like, and I feel like a lot of people on the ground in Iran are making this connection as well, by the way. I do feel like there are certain parallels, which a lot of people who are not from Iran or not Iranian seem to understand. The Islamic Republic regime is funding Hamas, funding the Islamic
Hezbollah.
Palestinian Jihad. They're funding Hezbollah. I mean, we hear death to Hezbollah chants at all the protests. And the people of Iran are essentially fighting for their independence, right? From an extremist Islamist regime. I find it interesting that so many people that are anti-Zionist, and it's usually not Iranian people, but people that are anti-Zionist will oftentimes also be sort of posting or sharing things about Iran, and they're sort of not connecting. I hope I don't think I'm explaining this well.
You are. I get what you're saying.
But what
Yeah,
I'm saying,
because
like,
they're not connected. It's what I said at the top. They're not connecting the dots.
they're not connecting the dots, and the truth of the matter is, if Israel were to fall, for example, or if Israel were to cease to exist, because the organizations such as Hamas would have had their way to have Israel from the river to the sea, what the land of what would be referred to as Palestine would look like would be very similar to what the Islamic Republic regime looks like right now. And I also want to name that though the majority of people in Iran are Muslim, the majority of them are also very, very secular. And you're seeing many of them chanting in the streets that they don't want this as their government. They want democracy and they want freedom. And I think that a lot of people outside of Iran also fail to realize that Islam as a religion was forced upon Iranian people. However many, what was it, 1400 years ago. The Arab conquest spread through Iran, and that's how Islam became the religion of the Iranian people. But Iranian people's actual ethno-religious whatevers, like their religion back in the day was Zoroastrianism. Iran should be a Zoroastrian country, so there's that element of it as well. It's sort of this reach for the freedom of ethno-religious groups within any region in the Middle East and North Africa. And the same goes for Kurdish people. You know, all these people out here screaming for Mahsa Amini. Well, her actual name is JIMENA, which is her Kurdish name. And the Kurds have been fighting for independence for many, many, many years now, which is why there's this interesting sort of kinship between Kurdish people and Jewish people, is because Jewish people have managed to achieve sovereignty in our historical homeland, which is something that the Kurdish people have wanted for a long time and have unfortunately been unable to have.
Indeed. As I told you before we started rolling, I just got back from Iraq and I spent about 9 days in Iraqi Kurdistan. And let me tell you, there are a number of parallels between the Jewish people and the Kurds. And in fact, Israelis can go to Kurdistan and vice versa. So there you go. There's a very warm relationship between the two entities. Let's move on to Zionism right now. We've talked a little bit about Israel and invoked it there just for a second. So that's where I'd like to go right now. As you very well know, Jewish National Fund USA has launched a whole year-long campaign. It's called Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. And I say you know about it because you were featured in one of those conversations with Jewish National Fund USA CEO Russell Robinson. So everyone can go to youtube.com/Zionism Studios to see all of these conversations, as well as to see Matthew in action and in conversation with Russell. So before we talk about Israel and Zionism, I'd love you to share your definition of Zionism, what you think Zionism, Matthew, is all about, really.
To me, Zionism is all it means is the right to Jewish people to have sovereignty and self-governance in our historical homeland. That's all it means. Like everything else comes secondary to that. Now you have different branches of Zionism, different whatevers, you know, religious Zionism, conservative Zionism, liberal Zionism, whatever. All of it boils down to the right for Jewish people to self-sovereignty in our ancestral homeland. So that's what it means to me. And I do want to add that, so you're going to get me off on tangents now, but like,
listen, I'm the king of tangents, Matthew.
No, I'm in good company. The term Zionism has been completely bastardized by anti-Zionist and anti-Israel activists to mean something really nefarious and evil, which is, I feel like, part of a game plan to delegitimize Israel. But all it is an indigenous land back movement of the Jewish people, and we've succeeded.
How did you become an Israel advocate? Because clearly you didn't have to.
No, I didn't have to. And I would say, you know, when I was much younger, I was very rebellious. I still am. I guess that's part of also why you could say why I am an Israel advocate. But I was very rebellious, and one of the things that I rebelled against was my Jewish identity and my Iranian identity, because I saw them as hindrances to my queer identity. So at that time, as a teenager, for example, when my mom wanted me to go to Birthright or whatever trip was happening at that time, I was like, absolutely not. I'm not even a Jew. Like, just all this ridiculousness, right? And I move in very progressive circles, I guess, and I start hearing these things about Israel, and every time they would come up, it would just kind of hit me the wrong way. Like it hit me personal. So I was like, well, let me research about this and see what is Israel all about. And I went there for the first time as an adult. I went there in 2007, and I absolutely felt such a strong connection to the place, to the land, to all the history. And so I wanted to learn, and the more I learned, the more I realized that we absolutely have a right to be there. That is where us as a Jewish people originate from. And because of colonialism and imperialism, we've been dispersed all over the world, and all of the trauma and drama and all of the tragedies that have occurred to us throughout history in literally every part of the world has been because we've been without our homeland. So it became sort of really important to me to speak up and shine a light on the truth of what Zionism is and what Israel is, and who Jewish people are, because it's all tied together. So that's kind of why.
The whole intersectionality thing, Matthew, is way beyond my pay grade. But, the LGBTQ community tends to go in the anti-Israel direction. So how do you navigate that? And what are those conversations like with people that don't share your views on Israel?
So listen, it's not an easy thing. First of all, always want to say, because we see, it really rubs me also the wrong way when Jewish activists or Israel activists will post things about LGBTQ people who are pro-Palestine or whatever. First of all, I always say, saying pro-Palestine, being pro-Palestine should not mean being anti-Israel, and vice versa. What we all need to understand is that the LGBTQ plus community is and has been historically repressed and suppressed and discriminated against people. So we naturally will gravitate towards the underdog. And what the anti-Israel camp has been very successful in doing is connecting the Palestinian movement or the anti-Zionist movement with other social justice movements, right? So we've seen it kind of infiltrate into literally every other social justice movement, and the LGBTQ plus movement, rights movement, is no different. Now, there is a level of cognitive dissonance there, because anybody who does do any research into the government, and in fact, much of public opinion within Palestinian territories, treatment, like what their treatment is of LGBTQ plus people, kind of goes against that. But I think it comes from a place of compassion, and I think that it comes from a place of misinformation and being uneducated on the matter. So I think it's important to try and have conversations without pointing fingers and without, the chickens for KFC and all of that. Like, it doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't help the cause. What helps is to have civilized, compassionate conversations. Now, if that doesn't work, then you move on. You can't win everybody, But I just think that that's what it comes from. It comes from relating to the underdog.
I agree that one has to have civilized conversations that are based on fact. And I'm wondering, have you had the opportunity to have those types of conversations, and what's been the result, if so?
It's very, very challenging. There are people who are really good at it. I cannot say that I'm one of them. I work primarily through social media spaces, which is where the majority of my advocacy work is, and in article writing and public speaking. Unfortunately, when I've been confronted with it, it's usually been by people who, and I've tried to have conversations, whether it's in comment sections or whatever, but people who are the most vocal are people who have usually already made up their mind about it. So when they're asking you questions, they're not asking you for a genuine response. They're trying to provoke you into saying something that will, I don't know, start an argument. So but I have had instances where I have been successful about it. I think it's, Rudy Rockman is somebody who's really, really excellent at having those difficult conversations and maintaining his calm and being able to just kind of spit back with facts. I'm not that person, unfortunately. I'm better sitting down, having the time to write something out, or that's where I kind of do well. I think everybody has their place. Now, there have been, back and forth that I've had in comment sections in the past that have been, varying degrees of successful, whatever that may be. And what I found is the most important element, the times that it has worked, has been when I've been able to show a level of understanding and compassion for the other side and not dehumanize the other side, because that will break down the wall that's up of this sort of like defensiveness, right? That's when you're able to then have a conversation, and that's when the conversations have been successful enough to get the other person to actually go, at the very least, okay, I kind of see what you're saying now,
So your advice then to people listening that want to advocate on behalf of Israel is, it seems to me, do what you're comfortable with and do what you're good at doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really would like to, encourage people to veer away from there's a lot of vitriol. Maybe it's what I see because of the Instagram space that I work in primarily. There's so much vitriol and so much it just doesn't help. It doesn't help anything. But yes, you're correct. Do what you're comfortable doing. And if it's not within your wheelhouse to have those kinds of conversations, then you don't have to have those conversations. You can walk away. None of us owe any conversation or anything to anybody.
I sometimes get the sense, Matthew, not sometimes, all the time, dare I say, that people in the Israel advocacy space or the Jewish advocacy space, because of the rise of anti-Semitism, are oftentimes, most of the time, speaking in an echo chamber.
Mhm,
And it's the preacher talking to the chorus.
mhm.
And I'm just wondering, how do we begin to break away from that? To reach people that, because I think in your conversation, for example, with Russell on Conversations on Zionism, he mentioned the fact there's always going to be 20% of the people that are lost that you're never going to reach because they're so set in their ways, etc. But what about those people that really do want to be educated or those people that just don't know? So how do we break away from those echo chambers?
So, firstly, I do want to name because I remember doing a panel discussion with Weezo a few months back, and that the question of the echo chamber was brought up to me as well. And I do want to state that I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, and I want that to be clear because a lot of young Jewish people are not feeling empowered enough to speak up. So I think it's actually an element of importance to speaking within that echo chamber so that other young Jewish people can see what it's like to see somebody who is proudly Jewish and proudly pro-Israel. With that said, I think a really important element of breaking out of this echo chamber in order to reach a wider audience and to reach that 80% who are undecided is to come from a place of compassion and understanding, which I think is very much lacking in a lot of Israel advocacy. There's a lot of anger, and rightfully so, and there's a lot of defensiveness, also rightfully so. I get it, but I think a lot of us really need to learn how. And listen, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I'm guilty of being vitriolic as well, but I've noticed that it doesn't help anything. I think the argument of, for example, if you post something that says, I can't believe the Palestinians did this, and this, you're not going to reach anybody outside of your echo chamber, right? If you were to post, and I learned this from my friend Chen Mazig and the Tel Aviv Institute.
Who we've had on the program.
I love him so much. That's Achi for life. Like, I really love that guy. But they teach us at the Tel Aviv Institute, rather than saying that, your messaging should be Palestinians and Israelis have a right to live in peace and harmony, right? And I've tested this, and when I have done something along those lines, the reach has been so much further because people can then connect to that. Because that 80% who is undecided or who doesn't understand what's going on or doesn't want to know what's going on, they do understand, wow, okay, peace, unity, that's the goal here. And that should be the goal. The goal should always be, in my opinion, peace. And I always say anybody who's veering away from the ideal of coexistence and peace is veering into the land of extremism. And it happens on both sides. And it doesn't help anyone. It hasn't helped anyone for 74 years. And I don't think it's ever going to help. It just creates conflict.
One of the big challenges that I see in the Arab world, I'd love you to respond to this. I'd love your thoughts. They have been taught for 74 years, as we record this, how awful Israel is, how awful the Jewish people are. So governments can establish diplomatic ties, the Abraham Accords, for example, and that can all happen at a very government to government level. But then how do you change the hearts and minds of the people? How do you tell the people, by the way, for the last 74 years, we've been lying to you, or we've been misleading you, or we've been sharing information with you that isn't quite right?
Firstly, genuine connections on a one-to-one level are so important. That's first off. Second of off, you asked me an accomplishment of JIMENA. One of our accomplishments was we have someone named Hadil who works on our team. She's essentially the Arabic outreach director, you could say. And she's a Syrian person, and she's suffered at the hands of the Assad regime. She managed to get out. She's in the US now, and she's an advocate. She's not Jewish, but she has managed to create a Facebook page, JIMENA Arabic, that is all Arabic language. She started a podcast, which is all in Arabic, where she speaks to Jewish and non-Jewish people who are Arabic speaking. Now, our JIMENA Arabic Facebook page has way more followers and way more engagement than our regular Facebook page. And when we ask her, she says the majority of people who are engaging are people that are not Jewish, who live in Arab countries, who are fascinated by this and who have not, they don't know the history at all. Of course they don't know. Nobody's going to tell them that, right? So there is an interest there. To what percentage or what degree, I don't know. But that is there. So I think what that shows us is, again, those sort of the communication aspect is so important, and learning how to communicate and building bridges on a one-to-one level, whether it be on something like a Facebook page or whatever. That's a really important start, and I'm really proud of that. That's something that JIMENA has been able to accomplish. Yeah.
I'm glad you shared that. So, by the way, in doing my homework for our conversation, I saw you gave a speech in October in West Hollywood. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the city of West Hollywood had put forth a measure to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and Stand With Us sort of put out a call and said, you know, let's go speak at this, because there's a lot of people from pro-Palestinian groups who are going to be there, who are kind of taking everything out of context, and we should show up. So I said, I'm there. I live in the city of West Hollywood, so it's important to me. And I went and I wrote a whole little, you know, speech for them. And I spoke along with several other people. And the measure was passed unanimously by the council people and the mayor and everybody in the city of West Hollywood, but it was not without a fight. I mean, there was more people there, probably 2/3 more than that were there to speak out against the IRA definition. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, because it made me see that we need to do a better job of showing up, physically showing up. But it was important to me, and I'm glad that it passed. And there's so much misconception about the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which, again, like many other aspects of being Jewish, it's just misconception after misconception. There seems to be this idea that if the IRA definition is adopted, first of all, when governments, local governments or bigger governments adopt the IRA definition, it's not a legally binding thing. It's a guideline. They're adopting it as a guideline so that they can better understand what the Jewish people, what we ourselves are telling you, are defining what the hatred towards us is. But they were all under the impression that this meant that you wouldn't be allowed to criticize Israel, and that any criticism of Israel would be considered anti-Semitism, because when IRA gives examples of what could be considered anti-Semitism, one of them speaks about Israel. And what they pointed to was when people are essentially intentionally demonizing Israel based on misinformation or disinformation, that's when you fall into anti-Semitic territory. That doesn't mean that you can't criticize Israel. I, by all means, criticize Israel. And I've told this to non-Jewish advocates and activists online who have posted things that come up. I remember somebody posted something a few months ago that she said that was basically put Israel in a positive light. And it wasn't even about Israel, but somehow that came up. And she got so much flack for it that she took it down and then posted another post saying, every time I post about anything Jewish, people come at me saying that I'm anti-Palestinian and this and that, and I'm not, and I'm against Zionism. And I messaged her and I was like, why are you saying that? That's not, you don't need to say that. And she was like, I'm so sorry, I worded it wrong. I was like, the minute you acknowledge that Israel has a right to exist, then go ahead, criticize all you want. If you see something that's wrong within the government, go ahead and criticize it. But when you go into the terminology of I'm an anti-Zionist, you're denying that Israel even has a right to exist. And that's when it becomes a problem.
Well said, Matthew.
Thanks.
I want to switch gears, and on a lighter note, we've been doing this show for 5.5 years, and I believe you are our first drag queen that we've ever had on the program, or at least
I'm
the first
honored.
person, that I know publicly is a drag queen. So how does,
do you know any people who are not public drag queens?
listen, I don't know what people do in their spare time, okay? I just interviewed them here for an hour. What they do in their spare time is their business. How does one become a drag queen?
Oh gosh. How does one become a drag queen? I can't speak. I can only speak to how I became a drag queen.
Go ahead.
And for me, it was through a lot of, well, first of all, I first discovered drag when I was a wee teenager in the 1990s, and RuPaul came out, and I was just blown away by it, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And then my love affair with drag only lasted, maybe a year, because it created such havoc within my family and extended family in the Iranian Jewish community here in LA that I put it away. And I didn't sort of reconnect to it until maybe 20 years later, at what point I'm like already in my 30s. And for me, it was really about connecting to my femininity, which is something that's very much a part of me. And so I became a drag queen through sort of soul searching and wanting to express my gender in the most glamorous way possible. And that's how that happened for me.
And can you talk about navigating the Iranian and the Jewish world and being a drag queen?
Yeah, I mean, navigating is really what it is. I mean, I'm literally navigating it still to this day. And, there's a certain empowerment that comes to getting older, which is that you stop giving right? And I think once I was in my 30s and I discovered that, listen, this is something that's been sitting in the back of my mind that I kept pushing away for 20 years. And why am I doing this to myself? If this is what I want to do to express myself, then I should be allowed to do it. And that was a big part of navigating it, was being able to have the courage to say, you know what, you can reject me if you want to. I'm doing this because this is who I am, and this is what I love, and this is what I'm going to do. So either you're with me or you're not. And there's something very empowering about that. And, there's way more people that are with me that are not. And I mean, there are a lot of people like family members who I'm sure are really uncomfortable with it. And part of that is my own fault because I'm still uncomfortable with presenting it to them. Like, I'm not going to
Have they seen you perform?
They've seen me online. I don't think any of them have. I mean, some cousins, like who are my generation and younger, have seen me in person, but like aunts, uncles, second cousins and all, which, by the way, in Persian culture, they're all aunts and uncles. I think some of them are comfortable with it and some of them don't understand it, but they also realize that at this time, which is very different than even 10 years ago, this is a part of popular culture now. This is here. It's not going anywhere. And they still love me, and that's all that matters. Most of them.
And I know, sadly, your mom has passed away.
Correct.
And your father is what, when in terms of having seen you perform, is he on board? Where does he stand?
So he lives in London still. He never left London, and he is completely embraces me and completely supportive of me and is proud of me and loves me for who I am. And it's been a journey to get here, but he was, he's a very intelligent man and a very smart person, and understood, he did his own research. Now, I've never been in drag in front of him. I would still be uncomfortable with that just because of my own but like he he's read my articles that have come out about the intersectionality of being Jewish and being a drag queen. I'm sure he's seen my social media. So he loves me. He's my father and he loves me. I'm his child, and that's all there is to it, you know?
Are there other Jewish drag queens?
There's other Jewish drag queens. I don't know if there's any other Iranian Jewish drag queens.
Okay.
There's definitely other Jewish drag
So
queens.
what makes a successful drag queen?
I don't know because I've not really been a successful drag queen. If I
Well,
can,
if you've looked at other successful drag queens, what makes them
um,
successful?
um, I think being able to put yourself together really well is important. I can speak to what I consider successful because you could be famous and rich or, you know, in-demand drag queen, and which there are many now, thanks to RuPaul's Drag Race, which is fantastic. But I wouldn't consider their outfits successful half the time. You know what I mean? Like to me, for me, for me, drag was almost like a stepping stone. I don't even know if I would consider myself a drag queen at this point because I don't do it for performance. I don't lip sync in bars for dollar bills to be thrown at me. It's not my thing. I
What is
just
your performance?
I don't really perform anymore. I just go if I feel like going to a party in drag, that's what I'll do, and it's just sort of an expression of self rather than a performance.
Got it. I've seen you in drag online, and I must say, it takes an awful lot of energy to put on that makeup and the
Yeah.
eyelashes and everything else. How long does it take for you to get ready?
Uh, and you usually average, I would say, is about 3 hours. It used to be like 4 or 5 hours, but I got better.
4 or 5 hours.
It used to. Oh my God. When I first started doing it again, it was like 2016, 2017. Like I would have to take the whole day off work because first of all, I have a tremor condition, so it's hard to apply makeup even with the medication because my hands tremor. And secondly, I don't have a background in like makeup artistry or anything, so I had to teach myself how to do it, which I did, and now I can do it faster. I've done it in like 2 hours. I think the fastest I've ever done my makeup has been an hour and a half to 2 hours. I don't know why it takes so long. It just does. It's like layer upon layer. I mean, you have to like erase everything, block out your eyebrows, and then sort of paint this face on this blank canvas.
And how long does it take to get all that stuff off of you?
Again, it used to take me a lot longer, but now it doesn't take. It's like half an hour, I would say.
What do you use to get that off of you? Is it like industrial strength something?
The thing that's hardest to get off is the glue that I use to block out my eyebrows and my sideburns. And you want to hear a funny story? I actually
Sure.
use this. I have one sitting right here for whatever reason. You can't see. So these glues, Elmer's
Elmer's glue you
purple
have.
glue stick. Yeah, you block out your eyebrows and your sideburns with it. And just up until like maybe 6 months ago, I didn't realize that this comes off just with water and soap in the shower. So I would sit there with like cold creams and coconut oil and makeup removers, scrubbing it in, trying and letting it sit on my eyebrows until it dissolved the glue. And then I found out that you could just get in the shower and wash it off with shampoo and warm water, and
Isn't
it
that
was a lot
isn't that
easier.
rather dangerous using Elmer's glue on your face?
Listen, a lot of things you do in drag are dangerous. It just is what it is.
I suppose there are more dangerous things than Elmer's glue.
Yeah, I haven't had any kind of, I have sensitive skin. I haven't had any kind of reaction to Elmer's glue. I've had a problem. I have a problem where if things don't stick right the way I want them to, such as sometimes I'll put like little, gemstones on my face, or for Halloween, I put vampire teeth in, and if they don't stay, I'll just use super glue or nail glue.
On your teeth?
I did. My
Oh
dentist is
God.
really mad at me.
I think
Um,
everyone listening is really mad at you. I mean, don't do that. That's ridiculous. So
I've also used nail glue to glue earrings on. I've used it like I love nail glue.
no, that's ridiculous.
I know well, I'm ridiculous.
You got to find a different way. Maybe one of our listeners has some suggestions for Matthew in terms of how he doesn't have to use Elmer's glue and all this other um, gluey stuff. I don't even know what the term is, for it. And so every Halloween and every Purim, I'm guessing you dress up in drag. So you already have your costume for both.
Mm, yeah, for Halloween, I just kind of throw something together and then stick on vampire teeth and call it a day.
Okay.
For
Well, I think it's
Purim,
probably more than most people do. And then for Purim,
for Purim, I haven't, I don't, I'm trying to think if I've been out. Like, I don't think I have, but I remember last Purim, I created these really cool posts where I was in drag, like with pictures of me based on Queen Esther and, the Vashti and so on.
got it.
So those were cool. But those
Right.
weren't even, those pictures were just from outfits that I'd worn in the past. I mean, it wasn't like I put them together specific for that.
Oh, all right. Well, people, again, they can go on your Instagram page and see all of that. Just before we wrap, I just want to ask you about Israel because you had mentioned that you had, dare I say, a life-changing experience going to Israel for the
Yeah.
first time, right? Or I guess it wasn't your first time, but you went as an adult. And so I'm just wondering, when was the last time you're in Israel? When are you going back? Your favorite thing to do in Israel? The drag scene in Israel?
The drag scene is so much fun in Israel. I got to tell you, when I go out in Tel Aviv in drag, it is just the most fun. Like I love it. It's so much fun. It's like such a symbolically, it just feels like such a unification of my identities that it's just so awesome. The last time I was there was in November of 2019. I went with JDC Entwine on a special trip that they'd curated for people that had been on their past trips to learn about what they do there. So I was there for a week with that, and then I stayed an extra week or so. Um, and then COVID happened like a few months later. So that was the last time I was there. Yes, it every time I go, it's life changing in some form or another. There's so much to see, so much to do, so much to learn, and fingers crossed, it's not set in stone yet, but I've been working on an immersive experience, which for people to do with JIMENA, an Israel trip, an immersive trip to Israel, which is, I've never heard of anybody doing this before. It's an immersive experience centered around Mizrahi and Sephardic heritage and culture in Israel. So if that happens, which I'm pretty sure it looks like it will, it'll be happening end of May, early June.
2023.
Correct.
Okay, so stay tuned for that. Well, listen, Matthew, Nouriel, this has been such a pleasure. We just want to thank you so much for joining us here on IsraelCast and look forward to chatting again before too long.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, and we'll have info about Matthew on the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. So do check it out. And before we move on with a little housekeeping, I just want to remind you that Jewish National Fund USA believes the time has come for us to reclaim the narrative, take ownership of the word Zionism, as we've been talking about, and show the world how beautiful, inclusive, and inspirational it really is. So do join Jewish National Fund USA's Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's a year-long series which will educate, engage, and inspire on Zionism and its true meaning and reclaim its true meaning in all its glory. Go to youtube.com/Zionism Studios and you can catch Matthew there in conversation with Russell Robinson. Now, as for the housekeeping, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. It's so easy. Just search for IsraelCast. And don't forget to rate and review us to make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. It really helps in our rankings again, so more people can listen to IsraelCast and learn about Matthew and all the other wonderful guests that we've had. You can also enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. It's jnf.org/IsraelCast. And indeed, it takes a homo shop to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, and JD Krebs. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios, right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. Now, IsraelCast is indeed powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say hello, I know I'd love to hear from you. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Once again, israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.